Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games that they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 2009's Machinarium, the hand-drawn point-and-click adventure starring a little robot on a mission to save his friends.
Following that is the Kickstarter Darling, that pays homage to 8 and 16-bit top-down adventures about a beam sword-wielding warrior in search of a cure. 2016's Hyper Light Drifter. You know, looking at these two games, very different artistic styles to them. Hand-drawn, brown, grungy, metallic, versus pixelated, vibrant colors, the kind of almost futuristic, post-apocalyptic style of Hyper Light Drifter. Totally opposites there, but they are both indie games that over-delivered, both for Hyper Light Drifter and its wild exceeding of its Kickstarter goal, versus the fact that Machinarium keeps coming out on platforms, and that's
sure does.
Crazy.
It's really weird to have learned that this game came out on a platform in 2020. This originally released in 2009. But yeah, I'm very excited to learn more about Hyper Light Drifter. I certainly learned a lot about my game. But I believe both of us were like, oh man, I had planned to play Hyper Light Drifter before we got to this episode.
Yeah.
And then everything in the world happened.
Right, and then even, we're talking about it because Solar Ash is supposedly coming out this week, the follow-up game from Heart Machine.
Mm-hmm.
And that got pushed back a few weeks even then, so it was like, we had to shuffle everything around. It's been a bit of a crazy one, but yeah, no, this is 2021. Things are a little wild. We are recording, for full disclosure, more than a week before this comes out, so not going to talk about composer follow-up news. It's going to be way outdated by that time. But Joe, I guess in the meantime, for this point in time, how are you doing? What are you playing?
I am hoping to, basically right after this episode is recorded, finish Death's Door.
Ooh.
Death's Door is really good. It's super, super good. I would highly recommend it to anybody that's looking for a pretty good action game. And wow, that soundtrack is fantastic. So throw it on the list, I guess.
I guess so.
And I've also just been continuing Eastward, which is also very, very good. But I don't think I'm going to finish that. I might have finished that by the time this episode comes out, but it's still going to be a few days before I am able to hammer into the end of that. But that's pretty much where all of my video gaming has been done for the past couple weeks.
I've been putting in some work in Pokemon Shining Pearl. It's a fine remake. It's weird to see some glitches in there. You can tell that it's definitely a different company developing it. There's some kind of cutbacks here and there, but that's okay. It's still a Sinnoh remake and, getting the people what they want. And let's see, where am I? I just mopped the floor with Crasher Wake, so halfway through the gyms. And the mid part of that game, I forgot, goes as quickly as it does, because it's basically going to be like right on to Fantina and then right on to Byron. And it's like, oh, okay, all right. We're in like the early to mid 30s and we're just zoom, zoom, zoom. Next.
I haven't played Pearl in like a decade, but from what I have gathered from people that know even more about the game than I do, these are literally just, do you like Diamond and Pearl? These are just Diamond and Pearl.
Yeah.
But with 3D models instead of sprites. I still really like the art style of it. I think it looks fantastic. And I've only played up to the point where I beat Rourke, but it has to go on the back burner until I finish some other stuff, so.
Yeah. And then you're also making your way through Metroid Dread. That's exciting.
Oh, yeah. I fought Kraid last night.
Yeah, what a fight, right?
That is, the cutscene that happens before Kraid is the best cutscene ever. She has this sort of body language of, oh crap, what is it? Oh god, And then Kraid shows up, she's immediately like, oh, it's just Kraid.
It has like big vibes of like GLaDOS, of like, oh, it's you.
Yeah, it's like, it was really funny. I'm enjoying Metroid Dread a lot.
Yeah, I'm so glad you are. I feel like that was the sequence that like cemented that game. I'm like, oh, this game is doing real cool things. Like what happens then and what happens after, and how the items start to progress from there is excellent.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's talk about Machinarium. Now, if you're sitting here thinking, I don't know what Machinarium is, well, let me give you a suggestion. Go to your Steam library right now, and I bet you about an 80% chance you own Machinarium.
It's crazy, isn't it? It was definitely one of those like early ones in like the days of Steam sales and indie bundles. Like, yeah, you've got to have it somewhere if you've had a Steam library for years now.
Yeah, I almost guarantee that you own a copy of Machinarium. It was originally released for PC on October 16th, 2009, and it has been released a ton of times since. Ended up on iPad and BlackBerry Playbook. There's a name. In 2011. Oh, BlackBerry is a name I didn't think would ever come up on this show.
I mean, my God, I had a BlackBerry for work in 2012. I don't know what a playbook is. Look, okay, we're going to Google this right now. What the heck is a BlackBerry playbook? If it's like a proto iPad, like, you know.
What if it's an N-Gage?
You know, I don't know. It is a tablet. It's a tablet. So, you know, God, iPad released in 2010. So around that time, okay, sure. Playbook. Oh, all right.
BlackBerry is a name I haven't thought of in many years. Came out on PS3 and Android in 2012, hit Vita in 2013, PlayStation 4 in 2016, Nintendo Switch in 2018, and Xbox One in 2020, being the only time it has ever been released on an Xbox platform, and there's a reason for that we will get into. It was developed and published by Amanita Design. It is a point-and-click adventure game where the player must explore the world as a small robot named Joseph, collecting items that can be used to solve puzzles and get past various obstacles within the robot-filled city of Machinarium. At the beginning of the game, Joseph finds himself dumped in a scrap heap outside of town, and he must make his way back to the city in order to save both it and his friends inside of it from a mischievous plot being planned by the criminal trio known as the Black Cap Brotherhood. The story is presented entirely without dialogue, not a single spoken word in this game.
Oh, there we go. That's another theme.
There we go.
Boom, 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 boom. Hey! Indies with no spoken dialogue.
All of the narrative is told pretty much entirely through thought bubbles that have pictures in them. So like if you talk to a robot and he wants an oil can, then he'll just like think a picture of an oil can, and that's your hint. And by hint, I mean it's literally telling you what it needs. The visuals themselves come in the form of gorgeous hand-drawn artwork that honestly is something that continues to this day to be Amanita's bread and butter. And the question becomes, can Joseph stop the Black Cap Brotherhood and save his friends? And what is the Brotherhood planning to do to Machinarium? Peter, this is where I'll ask you, what are your experiences with Machinarium?
As you suggested, it is a game I own in my Steam library. I may own it a couple other places, just, PlayStation Plus, things like that, Xbox Live. Well, I guess not Xbox Live Gold, but it feels like I've owned this game in more than one place, but yet I've never played it. In fact, it's a game I'm only familiar with because of you bringing it up in, when we became friends years and years and years ago. Mm-hmm. It's a game I associate with you and only know of it really because of you, in addition to all the Steam bundles and all that. So I think it's fitting that you are bringing it to the show today.
So why am I bringing it to the show today? Well, you see, Amanita had an upcoming game called Happy Game, and I was like, oh, I'll do Machinarium when Happy Game comes out. Only to find out last week that Happy Game came out on October 28th, and I just didn't hear about it.
Oh, okay.
So we're doing it now. I have not touched this game since probably like 2010. I'm pretty sure I got it through a Humble Bundle. I'm pretty sure it was like in one of the first Humble Bundles ever.
Yeah.
And that's how most people have it. And I don't remember a ton of it, but I do remember like the visuals being very good. And I did remember the music being simple, but like catchy overall and fun. So I figured, why not talk about it? I've played the other big release that Amanita did, being Botanicula, and I thought about doing that, but I remember even less about Botanicula than I remembered about Machinarium. So we're playing it now. But before we talk about the game, I actually want to talk about who is Amanita Design. Well, it is a studio based in the Czech Republic, founded by Jakub Dvořák in 2003. I'm hoping that's the correct pronunciation on that.
Either that or Jakub. It's hard to say.
Jakub, yeah, it could be either one. And they have, for years, sort of specialized in quirky and unique and deeply, deeply weird point-and-click adventure games. Most of them have been made in Flash. I don't think that's the case anymore, because, Flash is dead, but at one point in life, they were making games in Flash. Most notably, they are the developers of the Semirost series. They also, of course, made Machinarium, Botanicula, a game called Chuchel, and most recently, like I said, released Happy Game. All told, they have released 15 games of varying length since their founding, with a 16th project that is currently in the works. They've also worked on various short films, music videos, and websites for different companies and groups from around the world, including the BBC, Nike, and musical group The Polyphonic Spree. Machinarium, though, was Amanita's first full-length game. All their others were like very short, sort of quick point-and-click adventure games, and Machinarium is their 7th release in general. It was developed by a team of 7 people over the course of 3 years and funded entirely by their own savings. Wikipedia mentions that their marketing budget was a hearty $1,000.
Woo!
Making it rain, baby. Originally, the game was being developed for the Xbox 360 because they were hoping to release it on the Xbox Live Arcade. However, back then, Microsoft had a policy that you could not put a game on the Xbox Live Arcade without a publisher attached to the project, and so they turned the game down. And Amanita wasn't really super hot on the idea of like approaching a publisher and therefore having to split profits with said publisher, so they moved development solely to PC, but also did give a little bit of a side glance to PSN because, hey, guess what? PSN didn't have any requirements of needing a publisher attached to the project. I didn't know where this fit best, but I think this is a super, super cool fact. Josef, he is named after Czech artist Josef Čepek, the inventor of the word robot.
Oh, that's neat.
That is neat. I like that a lot. Machinarium reviewed very well upon release, 85% on Game Rankings and 85 on Metacritic, but it has an even higher rating on both iOS and Vita, being an 88. However, it had a little bit of an issue in terms of sales. In 2010, Amanita announced that an estimated 5 to 15% of players had actually bought Machinarium, with the rest being made up of people pirating copies. So, in the hope that they would appeal to these pirates, the price was reduced from $20 to $5 for a period of 1 week, in the hopes that this would spur those who had pirated the game into buying it legally. And it worked. Over this period, Machinarium ended up selling 20,000 copies, and this grace period was extended to a week and a half. As of July 2016, though, according to Amanita, Machinarium has sold over 4 million copies.
That's insane. But I wonder, how much is it because it was bundled and everything?
Oh, probably. It's 100% because it's been part of a billion bundles. It has won many awards, though. It was an awards darling that year in terms of indie stuff. It won the Aesthetics Award at Indiecade, the Excellence in Visual Art at IGF. PC Gamer named it Best Soundtrack of that year. It was nominated for Outstanding Achievement in Art Direction by AIAS.
It's the DICE Awards at the time.
Yes, those are the awards that would eventually become DICE. The Paris Game Festival nominated it for the Milton Award. It was a runner-up for Kotaku's PC Game of the Year, being beaten out by Empire Total War, and Gamasutra Game Review, and a Turkish publication, Tom's Hardware, which got its own mention on Wikipedia for some reason, gave it Best Indie Game of the Year. So it was well-liked by the critic community. The website Adventure Gamers named Machinarium the 17th best adventure game ever released in 2011. No sequels, though. In 2011, they were asked if there was possibly any plans for a Machinarium 2, and they said it wasn't impossible, but they don't really think that far into the future. So then Botanicula came out after this in 2012 as their second full-length game, and then Samorost 3 in 2016 as their third. As I said before, Happy Game, their horror-themed adventure game, released last month on October 28th, 2021 for PC and Switch. Joseph appears as an unlockable bonus character in the original Super Meat Boy, which I had forgotten about until I looked this up. He's also an assist character in the upcoming indie platform fighter Fraymakers, which is, by the way, being made by the old Super Smash Flash 2 crew, as far as I'm aware. Got kickstarted last year. Looks neat. And he makes a cameo appearance in both Samorost 3, Ilo Milo, which I'm not familiar with, and Runner 2, Future Legend of the Rhythm Alien. Surprising amount of information on that game, though still also not that much. Let's talk about the composer, though, because his name is Tomáš Dvořák, or as he regularly goes, his artist name is Floex, Floex. He was born on February 14th, 1978, in Prague, Czech Republic. A contemporary Czech composer, clarinetist, producer, DJ, and multimedia artist is how Wikipedia describes him.
So he does it all.
He does it all. In an interview that I was able to find, he actually describes himself as, quote, half self-taught, half educated, as he studied clarinet at a conservatory for 6 years, but he didn't really attend a musical high school. Instead, he actually attended the Academy of Visual Arts and focused on like visual art, graphic art, stuff like that. Inspirations that he brings up include various names in the electronic music space, such as Future Sound of London, Aphex Twin, Orbital, John Hopkins, and Max Cooper. You can follow him on Twitter at FloexOfficial. Again, that's FLOEX official. In terms of discography, he's done 3 games with Amanita and hasn't really done much more than that. He did Samorost 2, Machinarium, and then he came back to do Samorost 3 when that came out as well, but he hasn't worked on any games since then. So how did he end up starting to work with Amanita? Well, I am really glad I found this story because, wow. During his schooling, a friend came up to him saying, "Hey, I didn't know you were involved with this game. It's really cool." That game in question was the first Samorost. And he was very confused because he was not actually involved with that game at all. He'd never heard of it. But then there was a twist. His name was in fact in the credits because the person doing the sound design for the first Samorost was also named Tomáš Dvořák. It was a different dude with the exact same name.
What a world.
That guy apparently still works at Amanita. One of the interviews I read, the next question the interviewer asked was, were you worried that when you met him, he was going to look exactly like and I found that really funny. So after the story had been repeated to him a million times, eventually he came into contact with Dvorsky, who offered him a position on the team. As Machinarium was a game taking place in a rusty, grimy robot world, Floix's hope was to make a good blend and hit a good balance between synths and orchestrated stuff. Because, like, yeah, sure, it's all robots and stuff, whatever, but, like, it's kind of this weird sort of universe that natural instruments also fit in just as well, and I think he strikes that balance pretty well. Some of the music he wrote, though, was deemed not really fit for the game. It just didn't fit in with any of the area's vibes and stuff like that, and these tracks were instead put into an in-game radio that players can cycle through to hear them. And before the game came out, they actually released a 6-track preview of the soundtrack, which is how I have some information on some of my Critical 5. And speaking of, let's get into that Critical 5. For Critical Check number 1, we have Clockwise Operetta. I think this is, just right off the bat, my favorite song on the soundtrack. It's really weird, but one of the things I like about it, you can hear it in the clip, there's this radio tuning, wobbling synth almost, that is just really distinct, that I've only ever heard in this game. And it's not in the clip, but later on in the song, there's like this really, really synthesized vocal part happening. And I think, hey, this makes it stand out really well. This is one of the tracks that were included on the preview. He says, quote, "The sound is made by an old Apple speech synthesizer. Nowadays you have speech synthesizers that sound very clear, but this one is very old. I like it because it really has this robot feeling. I made up some imaginary text and gave it to the speech synthesizer to sing. The tune was then totally recomposed. Another theme that inspired Clockwise Operetta is the sound of ticking clocks in the background. I don't know if you know the soundtrack to A Clockwork Orange. I wanted to have a little of that feeling of not being taken seriously. It's making fun a bit of classical operetta music. Instead of a real singer, it's a robot that sings this tune with the piano and clarinet." And it's just a fun track. I like it a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool things happening here, and you're right, it's really tough to pick just 30 seconds, so go and listen to the whole thing, but I think it kind of sets the vibe for the game, and like there's a lot of moving parts here, a lot of mechanical rhythm, but you do feel that kind of like grungy mechanical world around you with all that going. The radio tuning is such a neat touch, and yeah, there's just something grungy yet rigid and really alive here in a way.
Yeah, I think that's it's really interesting that alive is the vibe that it gives, considering, you know, robots. But the robots have a lot of personality and life to them, so it fits very well, I think. Following that, Critical Check number 2 is Mr. Honda Gote. Yes, that's how it's pronounced. Yes, I have been going for 10 years calling it Handagoat. Then I go to find out that it's actually meant to be pronounced as if you're speaking Japanese. So, Handagote, there it is. This is, from what I can tell, the theme of a repairman robot. And I don't know, I think this one has such a cool fusion of like live instruments, and there's some synths in there too. And like even the live instruments though, they're seemingly like a little bit processed to make them sound a bit more synthy and mechanical. And I don't know, this song is a very close second for me, but it's, I don't know, it's got this really, really, really neat, almost hectic vibe to it.
I think the fact that you mentioned that it's, you know, a workshop and someone who is like repairing these robots, I think then it kind of makes the plucked strings kind of come into full context, and you have, that chaotic nature, but like things are in repair and almost like the tendons in a way that would make up, you know, any inner workings of like a robot, like wires and things like that. That is a really neat twist, and I really appreciate that.
When talking about this track, as it was another of the tracks on the preview album, he says, quote, "I was trying to find out how far I could go with the melodical parts of the soundtrack. There's always this tension between abstraction and melody. This is one that achieved a balance so that you can listen to it independently, but also play it more times without it getting annoying. This was one of the hardest tasks on the soundtrack, but in the end, I think I succeed." And I agree. Yes, you do.
Yeah. Great pace.
Following that, we have critical track number 3, the Black Cap Brotherhood theme. This is the theme of the bad guys. It's the bad song. It's the good song, but it's about the bad guys. It's about them being bad. I don't know. I just think this song's really groovy, and it's got a good sort of driving, catchy momentum to it. And hey, that radio tuning sound effect is back. I really, really still like that radio tuning sound effect. It's great.
It really does make a nice little return appearance there. That's really neat. And just, the bass. The bass sets that strolling pace and that kind of swing to it. It gives you definitely a different vibe than the kind of happy environment that we've been perceived with, how the world sounds so far. But yeah, if you want to give your villain theme a go, it's one way of going about it, but I think it's effective.
Yeah, it's got a good strut-worthy momentum to it. You can get a good gate out of this one. Critical track number 4 is The Glass House with Butterfly. I mainly like this song because it's just nice and calm. It's lo-fi. It's got the record sort of static going on in the background, which I know you're not personally a big fan of, as we learned with Coffee Talk.
In places, right? I just don't want it going through the whole album. It can kind of confuse me at times, but for a lo-fi track in particular, like this one, I think is very effective in doing. It's a touch. It's a nice touch. I just personally I don't need it going through the whole thing. It just makes me think of the days of oh no, I'm gonna sound really old. It makes me think of the days of CDs. I know there are gonna be people who are like, what about records? And I know records are making a comeback and all that, but when you get little scratches in your CDs and it's is that my fault or is that the intended thing? It's a very anxiety-driven thing there. Oh God, I'm in my early to mid 30s.
It's okay. I'm only a year and a half away from 30 myself. We'll get through this together. Oh God. I do like though that this song does eventually sort of transition into a little bit less lo-fi and more just this really, really pretty piano piece that I just love. I think this song is gorgeous and nice and just relaxing to listen to. All right, critical track number 5. Hang on to your seats, everybody. We're going to The Castle. This is the music for the final area of the game. And I think it does super well with it's got this tense atmosphere to it with, I love pizzicato strings.
Yes.
I really love pizzicato strings and they're used to really great effect in this song. Just overall, I think it's just a good song and it sounds like something that you'd be able to focus on puzzles to while sort of, just enjoying the bop.
I think it's really interesting how, when you mention how it's a final area, most composers, most players going into it would be like, all right, I want big, you're talking about these strings, like you want like a big sort of swell moment. No, I think you're absolutely right. It's more effective when you still have puzzles here, like, give the tension there, but you don't have to go so hard with it. Have like any like dissonance in notes kind of be felt more than the dramatic stakes and volume. No, I think this is done really well. And yeah, a lot of cool instruments here. The double bass, the harpsichord, they really stand out here.
And it's kind of hard to have the big epic swell you'd expect from a game anyways, because of the nature of what kind of game Machinarium is, there isn't really any fail state. There's just, you did the puzzle wrong, do it again.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And that's pretty much it. I actually have a little blurb from Floex about this song as well. Quote, "The idea was to make music that would have a little bit of a castle feeling, but as dirty as everything else. You hear a harpsichord, a very typical instrument for this Baroque castle music. There is double bass and violoncello, but dirtified and degraded with effects. The feeling is like you would hear it from some old record. If you would look at my arrangement in Logic, which is the software I use to make music, the arrangement does not have so many tracks. Maybe 5 or 6. 5 or 6 isn't a lot of tracks?
Yeah, it could be a lot more, as we'll come to find. Especially with sound design and all that, you could definitely do a lot more. But I think it's interesting that he points out dirty. It just fits the world, the artistic style that Amanita went with. And I think that is nailed right on the head here. Perfect.
Yeah, I think a lot of the songs do that sort of aesthetic well because, like you said, the world, if you look at the art style, like a lot of scrap, a lot of trash and stuff. The robots aren't shiny or anything like that. It's a very grimy sort of robot world.
Brown in an artistic way, not in a mid to late 2000s. We're trying to be real, so let's give it a brown coat of paint. It was really effective.
Yeah. All right, tracks of the cutting room floor. First one is Nano Robot Tune. Not 100% on this, but I think this is one of the tracks that ended up being put on the radio because it didn't really fit anywhere else, which probably good call. Like, this is a really, really nice groove. Great song. I cannot imagine it would have fit well anywhere else in the game.
Super different, and yeah, it would actually fit more to come through a radio, so I think that's the right call. It's neat to see the breadth in what's on the soundtrack, but I think you're right, it doesn't really fit with everything else so far, and so I think the team made a good choice here.
And following that, the other track I have on the cutting room floor is The Furnace. This song kind of has this creepy vibe to it, but it also, I don't know what other word I want to use to describe it. Like, the three that came to mind were hesitant, maybe determined, desperate, but I don't think either of those three work.
I think they do in the beginning of the piece. The clip here is a little more of like the melodic part.
Which still has that creepy vibe to it a little bit, with like the bells and such.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think that does work well. You're right, and then the bass coming in, I think that drives the whole thing. It kind of is at the beginning of the piece and then really continues the foundation. I think that kind of gives you your uneasiness and hesitancy there, where there is pace, but it's like it's a kind of an off-kilter one, I think. This one's a neat one, and just like when they bring in these little pluck strings, I think you're right. The little pizzicato there, it's a good touch.
Yeah, I like me some well-used pizzicato. It reminds me of my days being afraid to play any music by ear with a bow because I was afraid I'd mess up. So what will I never forget about Machinarium? Well, I didn't say this before, but it's one of the first indie games that I sat down and played through ever. It was this, and I want to say Braid. And I never finished Braid, and I don't want to finish Braid.
Yeah, Braid got tricky quickly, and then you hear that ending, and it's like, okay, yeah, and
then you find out John Blow is kind of not a good person.
That too.
Yeah, it's been a rough time for video games, but yeah, Machinarium I think still sort of it has a place in my heart. Like I said, I haven't gone back to it in over a decade. I don't really have a huge interest in going back to it. I am very much looking forward to playing Happy Game. I will be doing the review on Switch for Happy Game for Nintendo World Report, but only because I bought it myself and we were never sent a code. But I wanted to try it. So, hey. But yeah, I think that I'll never forget, we brought it up multiple times. Machinarium is just a really pretty game in terms of its art style, and all the animations have so much personality in them, despite the fact that none of the robots have moving face pieces to emote with, but they still have all this personality to them in their world. So it's just a nice little artistic laid back game.
I think I'm tempted to play it more than I ever have been after this presentation by you. So kudos there, especially because it was one of the first Steam games I ever, redeemed a code for and all that. And it's been sitting there for years and years. And oh my goodness, that's wild to think about. But yeah, neat to see it given this sort of coverage by you, especially when I do associate you with this game. So that's neat.
It's good to know that I'm associated with this game, because I actually didn't know that. I had no idea that you associated this game with me. So, hey, you know what? I'm doing something right.
There you go.
Hire me, indie games. I'll make them associate your game with me, for better or worse. So, in order to transition, we like to highlight a fan cover, fan remix, whether it be on YouTube, whether it be on OC Remix, could be on Dwelling of Duels, if that website's still alive. I haven't checked in a long time. I found a very nice cover of the song The End by a YouTuber by the name of Yuri Guts. His first name is spelled Yuriy, and then last name is Guts. It's just this really, really nice acoustic guitar rendition fun to listen to, and just good. So please enjoy that. We'll be right back.
All right, let's talk about that game that we wanted to play and then life happened, so we didn't. It is time to talk about Hyper Light Drifter, which released on March 31st, 2016 for PC, with PS4 and Xbox One releases on July 26th, 2016. A Nintendo Switch port arrived on September 6th, 2018, and an iOS version released on July 25th, 2019. The game was developed and published by Heart Machine, with Abbey Light Studios covering the Switch and iOS ports. Hyper Light Drifter is a 2D top-down action-adventure game, a la The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, but with the pixel art look of Super Brothers Sword and Sorcery EP or Fez. Your character has an energy sword, and that's all sorts of super cool, right? But you also find different kinds of guns or other weapons throughout the world as an alternate means of attacks. You may, beat some bosses to get certain kinds of guns. But you don't just pick up random ammo pickups on the ground. You instead recharge the ammunition by hitting enemies or objects with the energy sword. So the energy sword kind of uses an energy sword to transfer to replenish your ammo for your gun and kind of use the two to attack and have this just pitch perfect combat experience. The experience is intended to feel as if you were playing on a Super Nintendo. So there is no spoken dialogue in the game. Hey, there's that theme with Machinarium. Instead, more emphasis is placed on the game's music and visuals to tell a story. It's like you're looking at a piece of art, or several pieces of art, to kind of convey the backstory and the exposition and all that, or what's happening. So yeah, no dialogue there. So what is the story of Hyper Light Drifter? Let's take it from their fandom page, because there doesn't seem to be a whole much of a story. So they described it as, quote, "Drifters of this world are the collectors of forgotten knowledge, lost technologies, and broken histories. Our drifter is haunted by an insatiable illness, traveling further into the lands of buried time, steeped in blood and treasure, hoping to discover a way to quiet the vicious disease. Echoes of a dark and violent past from the dead eras resonate throughout, and he can't help but listen." So the big question seems to be, can the drifter fight his way through the world to find the cure to his illness? And Joe, we kind of know the answer, but here's where I'll still ask you anyway. What are our experiences with Hyper Light Drifter?
Well, like you said, we know the answer because neither of us have played it. But it's one of those games that if you're even remotely plugged into indie games, you know about Hyper Light Drifter. Like, it's considered one of the big ones. And I don't know a ton about it except for I've seen some gameplay. I will recommend, for anybody that wants to learn more about the developer specifically, there is a podcast by Adam Conover, who does Adam Ruins Everything. He also used to do stuff with College Humor. He has a podcast called Humans Who Make Games, where he just brings on game developers and they talk about their career. And Alex Preston is one of the episodes. It's a very good listen. I definitely recommend that if this episode leaves you with a desire to learn more about the man.
Yeah, and I hope so. We like to try to highlight the people behind the games as well as the music, right? So yeah, Hyper Light Drifter, a game that, again, you get plugged into games, indie games, you know of the game. You've at least heard the title, but I didn't know too much else about it, much less its soundtrack. I did know that it was Disaster Piece behind the main composing efforts, and so we've talked about Rich Vreeland before for the episode where we covered Fez, and so it's one of the games that he's done. So it was one of those games where it was like, we should cover this game eventually, but it's Disaster Piece on it. What should we do? And then now we're kind of breaking into like, let's talk about musicians or sound designers and things like that. So this is where we get to finally bring Hyper Light Drifter to the show and you'll learn about it. Maybe make us even more eager to play this game, especially before Solar Ash comes out. So yes, you mentioned Alex Preston. He is the main developer, the creative director of this game. And he came up with this concept as an homage to 8 and 16-bit games, specifically meant to be a fusion between The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past and Diablo. The illness in the game is personally inspired by Preston's own congenital heart disease, while his love for Hayao Miyazaki films shows through, with the story having been likened by others to Studio Ghibli's Castle in the Sky, while Preston cites the studio's Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind as the inspiration for the game's world overall.
That checks out. The little I know about the game setting, that absolutely 100% checks out. Wow.
Good to know, especially with Ghibli fan over here with Joe. So, hey, that checks out. Way to go, Alex. So he decided to go the Kickstarter route to help the development of the game in September 2013. And Alex Preston was looking for a goal of $27,000. Prior to starting the Kickstarter campaign, he had secured the help of programmer Bo Blythe, who'd worked on titles like Samurai Gun, and musician Disaster Piece, who had worked on the music for Fez. Now, funding was exceeded in a day. And when the campaign was complete, more than $640,000 had been raised.
Ooh, boy. Fair bit more than he expected.
So, yeah, Hyper Light Drifter became one of the big indie boys. And it was originally considered for release in mid-2014. But once you start to raise that kind of money, an expansion of scope is generally what happens. So the game was delayed. There was consideration for releases of the game on platforms like Wii U, Vita, and the Ouya. Well, there's an Ouya dropping. We haven't talked about the Ouya a whole lot on this show. Platforms that would have been a little more relevant in 2013 when you're launching a Kickstarter campaign. But yeah, when you push the game back to 2016, these versions weren't released for, let's just say, a variety of reasons.
The Switch had killed the Wii U. Actually, the Wii U had killed the Wii U, and the Switch had taken advantage of its corpse. The Vita was dead, and
the Ouya was the Ouya.
The Ouya was never even around. It was never even alive.
I'll put it that way, putting it mildly. So the development team for Hyper Light Drifter consisted of around 10 people. And there's a co-op mode in that game. I had no idea of this.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, it was eventually patched into the game where the second player can interact with the world, but can help in combat. And as a result, player one loses 1 health unit as a result to kind of give to them. So the game reviewed well with a Metacritic average of 84 on PC. And that's kind of about the average in which it's kind of reviewed, because it goes as low as 76 on Xbox One, but as high as 88 on Switch. So praise has been given to the game's visuals, sound design, and combat mechanics, as IGN's reviewer, Brandon Tyrell, called the game, quote, gorgeous, trendy hunk of stylish old school sensibilities mated with the iconic hues of pixelated indie charm. That's a verbose but really good way of putting the style of the game. The biggest criticism, though, is that abstract storytelling of what people generally referred to as minimalistic moods. So you don't get the best sense of like the story necessarily, or like, could there be better ways to tell it? But when you're going for that SNES vibe and like no words, no dialogue, none of that, you're going to have a give and take there. Nothing really stood out there as far as statistics for sales, though you can always resort to Steam Spy, which estimates the number of players with Hyper Light Drifter in their Steam library, and that kind of estimated between 500,000 and 1 million players. So, I mean, that's for PC. Then you consider a few other platforms. Maybe we're kind of around the 1 million mark-ish at best. It's it's still an indie game at heart, but it didn't take off and set the world on fire, but it's definitely a critical darling, certainly in the indie space. It was nominated for Best Independent Game and Best Action Adventure Game at the Game Awards. It was nominated for Role-Playing Massively Multiplayer Game of the Year at the DICE Awards, and it was nominated for 4 awards at the Independent Games Festival, including the Seamus McNally Grand Prize and Excellence in Audio, but it won Excellence in Visual Art and the Audience Award. And finally, it was nominated for Most Fulfilling Community-Funded Game and Excellence in Musical Score at the South by Southwest Awards. So, what is the legacy of Hyper Light Drifter? Well, the Drifter, as a character, is a playable character in the indie brawlers Runbow and Brawlout. Hyper Light Drifter is also featured on one of the clothing options for Travis Touchdown in Travis Strikes Again No More Heroes, which, that No More Heroes game that praises indie games, kind of recognized in that way. There is apparently an animated TV series that was announced in March 2019 in a collaboration with Alex Preston and Adi Shankar, who's the producer force behind the Castlevania and Devil May Cry animated Netflix series. So we'll see if that ever comes to anything. And then we're talking about Hyper Light Drifter today because Heart Machine's follow-up game, Solar Ash, releases this Friday, December 2nd, for PlayStation 5, PlayStation 4, and PC. I'm sure more platforms in the future, if I had to guess. So let's talk about the composer to Hyper Light Drifter. Well, we've already said the composer is Rich Freeland, Disasterpiece, and we talked about him on our episode for Fez, so go learn about Rich there. So where did we go from here? Went looking into the sound designer for the game, and his name is Akash Thakkar. And Akash Thakkar was born on May 23rd, 1978. He sometimes goes by the alias online of Pixelbend, and his website was fascinating. It's probably actually one of the best websites that I've come across in research for this show. So kudos there, Akash. Because not only does he put just a really engaging website together, but he also does a lot of content, as we'll get to. So in his About section, he discussed how he played his first video game, Mega Man 3, at 3 years old. And that's where he discovered the power that music and sound could have in a game. Just like leaving it on and listening to the music for all the different Robot Masters, or even the password screen and all of that. He is a graduate of the Berklee College of Music, where he was both an instructor and leader of the game audio community. He also worked at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, as both a researcher and audio designer. As of 2016, at least, he also was a professor of game audio at the Seattle Film Institute. And so the big message that he puts out on his website and through TED Talks and GDC presentations says that the purpose of sound design is emotional impact. And it's not just like really, stirring emotion every time in the player, but you want to have the player have some kind of emotional impact, whether it's, oh, that's really cool, or like a yeah, or even just like a wistful, just like if you're just, your player's not feeling anything, like you're not doing your job as a sound designer, in his opinion. So yeah, Akash Thakkar records videos, different videos, different messages, has all these presentations at GDC. And he also hosts his own podcast, the Sound Business Podcast, which has featured guests such as Rich Freeland, Disasterpiece, Austin Wintory, Ryan Ike, and more. So go check out the Sound Business Podcast on podcast services everywhere if you like to check that out. And you can follow him on Twitter at Akash Thakkar. That's AKASHTHAKKAR. Again, kudos again to akashthakkar.com. Just a whole bunch of information and content there, and it's designed so well. Really, well done there. That made looking up him and his career much easier.
And hey, it's I'm looking at this this podcast page. This podcast started this year.
Wow.
Like in July.
Oh yeah, like he's still very active on his social media, promoting it, doing great episodes. I was pleasantly surprised to see that Ryan Ike episode. That was a pretty recent one too. So and we talked about Ryan Ike for his work on Where the Water Tastes Like Wine. And so neat to see some of those ties come together. So what has Akash Thakkar worked on as far as sound design goes? He's worked on Freedom Planet, Lost Words, Destiny Rise of Iron, Hyper Light Drifter, of course, Concrete Genie, Outer Wilds, Echoes of the Eye, which is the recent DLC campaign for that. And hey, Joe, you talked about how you're playing Beast Breaker. He did the sound design for that game too.
Hey, that's neat. Outer Wilds has really, really good sound design. So this guy knows what he's doing.
Also, that DLC is getting really, really good reviews and talk.
Yeah, I still haven't had a chance to play it yet, but I've heard great things.
Yeah, so wow. It's really neat to come across, we don't talk about sound design too often on the show. We like to highlight, the composers and the music, and we'll cover musicians. But I think for this game, it's important to cover the sound design because, yes, we've covered Rich Vreeland, Disaster Piece before, and he composed the music. But it's kind of the teamwork between Vreeland and Thakkar here. And that's the audio experience. And when it's a 16-bit inspired game, that's all you have to go on is that blend between the two and how it sounds. How does the sword strike sound? When you acquire items, what does that sound like? It's really, really important there. But then it's even really cool to think that Rich Vreeland and Akash Thakkar went to school together at Berkeley. And they met when metal band drummer Akash asked, "Where's the video game music club?" And that was basically Rich. And so they worked separately from each other on Hyper Light Drifter, while Vreeland was based in Berkeley, California, while Thakkar is based in Seattle, Washington. And apparently about 560 sounds were designed for the game. It's all about experimentation and what works, because ultimately about 300 made it into the game. Based on some of the GDC postmortems and discussions there, also interesting to note how there was a lot of layering. Thakkar showed how there was one sword slash out of many, where just this one sound effect involved 15 layers. And he played all the layers and then showed how it all came together. Just super cool stuff. Check out those conversations. If you're a big fan of Hyper Light Drifter, I highly encourage that. Also, Thakkar recorded his own voice to then turn into the sounds that the enemies make. Of course, with a lot of processing and all that, but still, his fingerprints, his voice, all over this game. As far as Vreeland goes with Disaster Piece, his music, for this game in particular, was inspired by Impressionist composers, such as Ravel and Debussy, and he used a lot of piano to sketch out ideas and show some basic concepts to Preston, who would then kind of sign off on those. So it seemed like a really cool collaborative effort. Of course, a lot of stressing, as many indie games would indicate. I'm sure that just game design is a lot of falling upwards. You're going to try and fail at a lot of things, but eventually it's going to come into place and you're going to get it right. But don't be afraid to keep trying and don't have failure set you back.
Yeah, me.
I figure that would reach right out to you there, because that is all it is. And you've definitely preached before on this show. That is what game design is for sure. So let's get into that soundtrack for Hyper Light Drifter. And we get into the 5 critical tracks. We start with the first one, Titan. If you're listening to this and you're thinking, boy, yeah, that does sure sound like Disaster Piece. That sounds like Fez. Well, there you go. That's the composer synth style. And that's a lot of synthwave inspiration, I have to imagine. We'll get to more, but I saw even some YouTube commenters think they were saying oh, it feels like it was kind of inspired by Tangerine Dream. And I'm oh, a couple weeks ago,
More connections, baby.
I know, we talked about Edgar Frosa and his work with Tangerine Dream and Grand Theft Auto 5 and Synthwave, and oh my god, yeah, so it's really neat to kind of come across that. Just love this one because of like just the big soundscape that just, swells, especially that little key change in the clip. Oh, perfect into like a C minor, and that's just real meaty. I love that key, but it kind of gives you this big sense of scale. And it plays in the first underground area in the game, so I feel like it's good at establishing like an initial sound presence. Also, whenever a Titan appears in the game. I wish I had context as far as playing the game to know what that's like, but it sure sounds that way with these big chords, and you get a big sense of grand scale here. Just a really good piece to start things off. We'll get into some more energetic pieces or more melodic, but like this is disaster piece, like heavy synth wave chords, like beautiful.
Yeah, it's this almost like rumbling synth, which I believe I know what it means that when a Titan appears. I think they're like the big human-like monsters.
They're toothy.
Yeah, I think that's what that means. Man, I really got to play Hyper Light Drifter. But yeah, this rumbling sort of deep synth with the chords elsewhere and everything really seems to fit that vibe just in general. And also, yeah, I didn't even think about, this is very, very good underground music for a game like this. Fits perfectly.
Absolutely. Just good one to start off with. And we go into this next one with another good track to include. This one here, number 2 on the Critical 5. This is The Midnight Wood. So if you have a game that's inspired by the likes of The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, and Diablo, you're gonna have to have a forest track, right? I feel like it's a quintessential environment, especially for a 16-bit top-down action-adventure game. You gotta have a forest, and as a result, you gotta have a forest theme. Like, I'm just thinking of like all the different classic forest themes in Link to the Past, Chrono Trigger, things like that. And I think this hits that perfectly. You have the melody that kind of goes the higher pitch, the da 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 da, but then like the driving undertone, the bass notes coming in to kind of give a sense of movement and uncertainty about the world here, and then the synth notes at the end of the clip come in there to further expand the sound palette. Just a really solid forest track here to really capture that environment, and the fans seem to enjoy this one a lot as well. So I think that's a really good inclusion here.
Yeah, it also has this sort of air of mystery to it, which I'm going to assume this forest is somewhat dark. Forests in video games are pretty much always dark, unless they're from Zelda. So that's the vibe I sort of get of like this, oh, you don't know what's hiding in this forest. Best keep moving. Let's go. Let's go. That's the vibe I get. Hopefully I am correct. We'll find out someday.
Yeah, it's apparently playing on the surface of the Crystal Forest, which is close to Central Town. So, yeah, again, like a forest theme, you got to include that in your game. I think it's fitting to include it here. Let's get to number 3 on the Critical 5, and this is The Last General. This takes place during a boss fight against the Hanged Man, which is interesting because I guess there's like some depressing sort of backstory to it with like a general that like I don't even want to, figure out. I didn't read too much into it for like sake of spoilers for myself and all that, but definitely there's some vibes of like, it's a pretty like depressing story of like a general who couldn't fend for his people well enough, and like this is all he has left. So when you think of it as a boss fight, and apparently a difficult boss fight of someone who at the core is almost like you, has a sword, has a gun, so it's almost like a duel between two warriors like this. I think it's really interesting how it doesn't have the intense frenetic pace that you'd expect from a boss fight, yet you can feel the oppressive nature of the world, of the fight, the mood that you've been conveyed with this story so far for this character. And yet you have to defeat him to pursue your goal of finding this cure. Just a really interesting juxtaposition of the action you'd expect from a boss fight, but yet it's so wistful here. And you can just imagine all the sound design of all the shots and the strikes going along all this. It seems really, really cool. I like this one a lot.
So what it reminds me of is, and it has been like almost 3 years since we talked about this game, Bloodborne.
Sure.
The First Hunter.
Okay.
The final boss music of Bloodborne, where it's like kind of somber and it's sad and it has this air of like, man, I really would rather not do this, but I guess that's what we're doing. I kind of enjoy when there's a boss fight that can have that sort of vibe. If people are looking for a game that is almost all boss fights that have this vibe, it's Ender Lilies. And I think that might be why I like Ender Lilies so much. But yeah, I dig when boss fights have like this narrative weight to them, where you can play a song like this and it fits, turns it into less like an adrenaline rush sort of thing and more into like, no, but you like this person and now you've got to kill him and that sucks. I don't know. That's the vibe I get.
Yeah, I think you nailed it perfectly. That's what it is. And I look forward to experiencing it in proper context because it sure stood out even in this way. But for a boss fight theme that is more traditional and energetic and fast paced, we get to number 4 on the Critical 5, and it's The Sentience. And this one's just so cool, right? So this is for the boss fights against the Reaper, the Sorcerer, the Summoner, and the Archer, which are pretty close to end game. So like we're kind of getting into that more dramatic stakes here. And that's in the first half of the piece. This piece is like 9 minutes long. Apparently the track also includes the title screen in there, as well as the emaciated Titan in the Barren Hills Underground. There's like 2 parts of the second half of the piece. But this is one that stood out to me for sure. And yeah, this is just Disaster Piece flexing at this point. You have a lot of synths that seem very familiar to his style, but also a lot of cool sound effect work that he's like doing in the piece, on top of, I'm sure, all of Akash Thakkar's sound design work with the battles. So I just think this is really neat. And just kind of, flexing on Disaster Piece's style here. This one is super cool. Really dig it.
Yeah, this is my favorite on the Critical 5, like, bar none. Because it's still not what one would expect from, like, a high-intensity boss fight. But it doesn't really... It's not going for, like, oh, yeah, here we go. Let's fight. Whoa! It's more, hey, this is going to be hard. And, good luck.
The world's also a little messed up. So, yeah.
Yep. It fits that kind of vibe perfectly.
It sure does. But we're actually going to go to the complete opposite end of the spectrum to wrap up things here on the Critical 5. And number 5, it's the track in the game, honestly. This is Panacea. Joe, it's piano.
Yeah.
You can't go wrong. Can't go wrong with piano. So Panacea, or essentially The Cure, kind of the end goal here. And so it makes sense that this is the credits theme. It's a very wistful, somber theme of just piano, and it's beautiful. Oh my goodness. The soundtrack opens, and even the game opens with its opening cutscene of a track called Vignette Panacea. And so it's a track that kind of like gives you a little preview of this piece, but man, this is the one. Like, if you're talking about YouTube views and all that of people on the soundtrack, it's like more than 3 million on this one, where it's like, in the, a couple 100,000s for some of the better ones of the other ones. Like, this is the song. And I feel like if you take one song out of this experience, if it were on the honorable mention, say on a best of 2016, it would be Panacea, which, makes sense because it is just gorgeous. Wow. Well done, Disaster Piece.
Yeah, I think I still overall like the Sentience better, but just because it's more of this like, hey, that's a neat take on sort of a vibe for boss fights, but this song is just gorgeous. Like you said, it's piano. We have both made it very clear that we are huge fans of piano pieces. So it's always nice to see them show up, even in a game like this, where the rest of the soundtrack is decidedly not that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just a very nice piece to listen to.
And I think it just goes to show, like, when Freeland was working on piano and trying to get a lot of the melodies down, like, this had to have been a prominent piece, and I think it shows. Let's highlight a couple other tracks, though, on the cutting room floor. I have two. And this first one is Cult of the Zealous. This is a little more what I have in mind when I think of, what if that composer from Fez did a boss fight? Not like you'd have a boss fight in Fez, but if you had a game where he's composing an intense action-paced boss fight, yeah, this one checks out. But this is another track where it's kind of split in half, where the first half of the piece is the mountains underground, but it's the second half where we pull this clip from, and this is the boss battle against the Hierophant. And so, yeah, wow, what a cool piece where it's just the junka 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 junk kind of beats, but these meaty synths under it. Just gotta be so cool with all that action. Really stood out to me.
You can also feel the Zelda on this one.
Yes.
This sounds like something I'd hear in a Zelda game. It's very, very good.
Really, really enjoyed this one. And then the other one's a little different, but I like it a lot as well. This one is A Chorus of Tongues. I feel like if you're setting up an underwater sort of environment, or at least an environment that's inspired by water, this takes place in the lake underground, you kind of have to have this vibe, especially if you're using synths, of like these broken up chords that just make a gorgeous soundscape with synths. And so of course it checks that box super well. But then it does something really cool that I liked highlighting in the clip here. It's like these warbling voice-like synths that almost make me think of like ocean animals, like whale sounds and things like that. And I think it just really gives a good environmental vibe. It's totally different than, the boss fights here and all the action, but as part of it's also just exploring the world with a top-down action-adventure game. And I feel like this checked a lot of boxes for me.
I thought they were just muted trumpets until you said what you said just now. Because they kind of sound like it, right?
Yeah.
A little bit. And I thought it was kind of goofy, but the recontextualizing it as like wildlife around you, like sea wildlife, Yeah, no, that's really cool. I like that a lot. Neat stuff.
So yeah, just a great soundtrack overall. And what would I expect from, the composer who did the brilliant Fez score? I mean, yeah, all the more reason to give Hyper Light Drifter a try. So what will I never forget about this game? I have to experience the game first, but I really want to even more after playing this. And Solar Ash looks so cool. So really hope that launch goes well for the team at Heart Machine. That should be fascinating to see develop. And I'm really excited for them and can't wait to eventually get to this game. Put it on the list. Got to get to it.
Maybe a 2022 gaming resolution.
I would say so, but I did such a terrible job. If you listen to our Thanksgiving Q&A, my 2021 resolutions have been so bad. But, maybe you're right. Maybe to add this one there for the indie side of things.
Half the time I do a terrible job on mine too. I think I checked off 2 in 2020, maybe.
Yeah, that's just how it is. So I'm glad we found a better theme between these two games. Sometimes it just happens. Like, we don't want to, spoil ourselves for looking at the other person's research and being like, oh, what is it about this game? So, from first blush, it was just like, oh yeah, these indie games like really over-delivered, like what their intended goal and vision was. I mean, first of all, with the Kickstarter for Hyper Light Drifter, oh my goodness. But the fact that Machinarium is still being released on platforms today, much less we learned about what a BlackBerry playbook is.
Yeah.
Wow. But then honestly, the better theming is not only are they indie games, of course, but the fact that their stories are told without dialogue, whether it's characters thinking with thought bubbles of objects in them in Machinarium, or these artistic pictures in Hyper Light Drifter. Can that be a detriment? Sometimes, but it's a good theme between these two games with Machinarium and Hyper Light Drifter. And that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakeasy. Joe is over at String Pixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want. That's hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. It's where Joe's other podcast, Smasher Pieces, is hosted. And you can find Smasher Pieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, all around the world, and also Spotify. We have a feed of podcast episodes that you can subscribe to, but also a playlist for Original Soundchat, where if we talk about a video game track on this show and it's on Spotify, it gets added to this big monster playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
Both of these games are on Spotify, so we will see both Machinarium and Hyper Light Drifter make their appearance on the playlist.
Thank you, indie friends. That's always very much appreciated. And when you're done listening, you can find the show on social media at Soundchat OST. Leave some feedback there for us. How are we doing with these episodes? What games should we cover on the show? That's going to be our big push once again for 2022. All right, Joe, who are we talking about next week?
I will be talking about Susan Calloway.
And I will be talking about Takeru Kanazaki. Oh man, that's another game that's been pushed back time and time again. But it's finally time to get to it. All right, to play us out, let's talk about that Vignette Panacea track, because that seems to be a cover on YouTube that got some good attention from Sam Griffin Guitar. And so, whereas Rich Freeland Disaster Piece had played that original on piano, this is more of a classical guitar take on it, and it really translates well. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.